Hello and welcome to the solutions for day 4 of 2020 of Advent of Code. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so day 4 I think was one that jumped a bit in difficulty for a lot of people. And let's talk about the problem here. So the problem is a lot more complicated than the previous days. And actually I'll have to copy and paste this later. But the problem is a series of inputs that are passports. And let's actually open up our parsing because we're going to implement that first. I actually think the parsing is the hard part of the problem. And once that's solved, the rest of it is mostly just tedious. But we'll jump into that. So anyway, the input is a series of passwords that look like this. They are separated by a blank line, which is 2 new line characters. And password fields are separated by spaces, or they are separated by new lines. So you can see this is one individual passport, and inside those passports there are fields that are colon separated. So we have to parse this essentially. And the question is how many passports are valid, and in this case the validity for part 1 is how many have the required fields. These are the required fields, this one is optional. Part 2 is the same, except a bunch of validation rules are added for each of the lines. But anyway, let's implement the parsing. Oops, I copied the parsing from before. Anyway, so we're actually going to return a list of dictionaries that map strings to strings, and not that. So let's import dict. And in this case, I'm going to use the split on double blank line. That's going to make this a little bit simpler. And so we're going to do for passport s in s.split backend. This allows us to split on 2 new lines. And then the next part we need to do is we need to split up things by fields. And so what I did here is, of course, we need to make our return value, return ret. What I did here is I split based on white space, either spaces or new lines. And fortunately for that, we can use .split with no parameter. And so we do for field in passport s.split. And then we're actually going to have a dictionary here. This is what we're going to populate with the fields and things here. In my actual solution, I wrote this in 1 line, but I'm going to do it in 4 loops. That's a little bit easier to understand. But comprehensions makes this a little bit easier. But then we're going to get the fields out of here. So we have to get the key and the value for each of these. So key underscore value equals field dot partition colon. And then we're going to assign those into this mapping here. So we can say dict key equals value, and then ret.append dct. So this allows us to accumulate all those different parts independent of whether they're new line separated or space separated, because split just takes care of any white space for us. And so if we run this, python 3 parsing.py, you'll see that we parse out, 4 of these passport objects, and they have their various fields here. But yeah, I think that's most of the hard part of this problem. But we're gonna actually skip over the parsing parts for part 1 and part 2, and just have them be pre-parsed. So let's jump to part 1. And you can see I've pre-parsed all of these 4 here, and so those are those 4 passports. And the part 1 is find all of the passports that have these required fields. So I'm actually going to take this list of fields here and copy this over here. Required equals, I'm going to use frozen set. So what frozen set is a immutable set type. And let's see if I can regex this properly. Need to replace that with back 1, comma. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so these are the required fields that we get out of our keys, and if any of these don't have these fields, then they're invalid. So we can say total equals 0, and then return total. So we want to do for passports in input. Now I'm going to use a neat trick with the keys object, which actually acts like a set-like object, and require that it has every single one of these fields. Now note here that CID is optional. We don't actually care about it, but we're going to say that the keys has to be bigger than the required. And the mathematical term for this is it's a strict superset. Python has a useful operator that makes this easy, so we can say passport if passport.keys is greater than or equal to required, and the keys object is a key view, and it supports set-like operations, including greater than or equal to. This actually gets translated into the superset operator. We could also say like, you know, a set of keys, set of this passport object dot is superset of required. We could do it that way, but I'm going to do it with the greater than or equal to operator because I don't remember whether the set function is actually named that way. But we can just do total plus equals 1. And if we run this now, python3 part1.py, you'll see that we get our expected answer there. And again, this is O1 over our input, or sorry, ON over our input. This is ON over the keys. However, it's kind of expected that the number of keys, well, the number of keys is constant, so it's less than or equal to 9. So a constant times ON, this is actually like OM of some other M, but M is much smaller than N, so this is kind of discarded as part of the algorithmic efficiency. So the overall is just ON. And part 1 is done, so let's look at part 2. Note in part 2, I've copied more inputs here, so there's 4 valid and 3 invalid here. And we have to implement a whole series of rules here. Now, I found when I was implementing these rules that the easiest way to think about them... Oh, that's not going to fit on that screen. Let's... Actually, we don't actually need it anymore. Part2.py. The easiest way to think about these rules was using regular expressions for some of them. But, you know, you could do these without regular expressions. If you want a crash course on regular expressions, I did a video on that, and that'll be linked in the description. Let's import RE. That's going to help us implement this. And actually, let's take the code that we had for part 1, because we're going to reuse this keys check as well. All right, so in this case, we need to check every single one of these conditions. The way I'm going to write this is a bunch of separate if statements. In my actual solution, I combined them all into one big, giant if statement. And I don't know, might make it a little bit easier to read if I don't do it that way. But let's actually say the opposite of this, and then we will continue. So that skips this case here. And then we're going to check each of these conditions separately. So let's start with BYR. And so we want to say if, and we have a range here, 1920 is less than or equal to int of passport BYR. It's less than or equal to 2002. Now note here that I'm using compound conditionals. Your language might not support this, but Python does. And again, we can say if not this, then continue. And so that's the BYR one handled. Let's do the IYR and EYR one, which are similar, but they have different ranges. So IYR was 2010 to 2020, and EYR is what? 2020 to 2030? We'll actually just combine these together because otherwise we're going to run out of room. Normally I would space them out so that they read a little better, but I find that this is going to work better. Okay, height is a number followed by either CM or int. So we want to say if not passport hgt.ends with, so it should end with either CM or inch. And it should also be a number. So I actually reached for regular expressions here instead of doing it this way. And so I did match equals re.match. And our pattern is going to be, starts with some number of characters. We're going to capture those. And it should end with either cm or inch. We're also going to capture the centimeters or inches here, because that way we can figure out which one it is. And if we didn't match this, if not match, we need a $sign at the end, so that we're matching the entire string. If not match, then we continue, because that's our error case. If match 2, that'll grab this centimeters or inches capture group. If that is equal to inches, And let's see, and not what? What is the range here for inches? 59 less than or equal to int match 1 less than or equal to 76. Then we continue. So that's the inch cases handle. We'll do the same thing for the centimeters cases. What is the centimeters? Being between 150 and 193. So that should handle this. Okay, next let's do hair color. Hair color is an octothorpe followed by 6 hex digits. And so we want to say if not re.match, and our regular expression here is a... Actually, we probably don't need raw strings here. It's an octothorpe followed by anything that's A to F or 0 to 9, and we want 6 repeats of that, and an exact match, so we have both caret and $. And if that doesn't match, we need to pass in the string here. We didn't pass in the string here either. HGT is passport HCL. The next is ECL, which has to be one of these values. So what I did for this one is I made a set here. So hair colors equals frozen set, and I just did .split. This made it really fast when I was writing this solution. .split will split on white space, and so you'll get, each of these is a different set member. So if we can say if passport ECL not in hair colors, then we can continue. And again, you can kind of see like how just how complicated this problem is, or just how tedious this problem is. But we have one more thing to parse, which is passport ID, which has to be a 9-digit number, which can include leading zeros. So lastly, we can say if not re.match, and we're going to match a caret followed by 9 digits. Or sorry, we're gonna the start of the string 9 digits, and continue. And if we passed all of these cases here, then we can increment our total. Assuming I typed this all properly. Required is not defined. Dang it. Oh, I didn't copy that from part 1. Okay, get that in here. And if we run that again, match missing 1 required string. Right, we need to put passport PID. And we get 4. Cool. I'm so glad we got 4, because otherwise we'd have to debug this massive nonsense here. But anyway, that's how I approached part 2. A bunch of tedium. This is actually the problem that I got points on, so I typed out this tedious stuff really, really quickly. But anyway, there's our part 1 and part 2. And again, this is, this is ON, and then all of these are roughly constant, so it's still ON overall. But anyway, hopefully this was helpful, and I will see you again for day 5. Why is my button not working? What is going on?